not acceptable. Not in my classroom, ever, okay?
Well, maybe my son's in the wrong school.
You be quiet, because this represents hatred, this represents corruption, and this represents things that I don't even want any of my children exposed to.
Okay.
So you need to have a discussion with your son, and you need to not have this going on in my school, in my classroom. You can change classrooms if you'd like to.
So you are a teacher, right?
I am a teacher,
and
Mr. Connor.
What's the First Amendment right? What is the first one?
Okay.
Let me hear it. What's the first one? Freedom of what? Freedom of what? Because that's what my son's talking about.
Okay, you calm down right now, Mr. Connor.
No, this meeting's over because I'm not going to sit here.
The meeting is over. Because you're to that hat is blocking any kind of intelligence that you even have.
Okay.
And now no wonder.
I'll speak to the school board.
I see where your son gets it.
This is a Fox News alert. We just learned that President Trump is going to sign an executive order tomorrow eliminating the Department of Education.
All right, guys, well, we got some updates for you tonight from the Trump White House on the issue of education. Of course, educational reform was a major promise of President Trump on the 2024 campaign trail, and he is already beginning to act at lightning speed to fulfill many of those promises. Tomorrow, shortly here, President Trump is set to sign an executive order that will apparently be commanding the abolishment of the Department of Education. That is right. We are moving to shut it down. It is happening. This is something that long before Trump came around, conservatives, Republican activists, everyone on the right wing was calling to be done, but no Republican president had the stones, had the courage to touch it. Now Trump is doing it. Of course, there are still people to this day that say that Trump is a fake conservative or he's ruined what the Republican Party is all about. I'm like, is this not what the Republican Party's been calling for years? Oh, he's actually enacting real conservative reforms in this country, especially when it comes to limited government, something that the old GOP claims to be all about. And you guys are still standing around saying that he's going too far or the populism is ruining what it really means to be a conservative. Give me a freaking break. I think the rhinos, many of them who have already been kicked out of their careers, kicked out of the Republican Party, quite fittingly, are just really bitter that Trump is significantly more effective and popular than them. But we'll talk about the rhinos, frankly, later in the video. First, I got to give you some other key updates here because apparently the woke universities are finding out right at the same time. Not only are we looking at the Department of Education, we're also looking directly here, guys, at many of the private, in some cases public, but mostly private universities here who have just simply defied what the Trump administration was saying they were going to do. And now, again, they are finding out the consequences that we warned them about. Of course, a major issue has been the men, I should say, playing in women's sports, right? Transgender athletes competing in women's sports. And you have major states and universities, right? Maine has already lost its funding for refusing to comply with Trump's executive order to ban it. Apparently, as of tonight, guys, the University of Pennsylvania, who is infamously known for this individual right here that I'm sure everyone is familiar with, they will also be losing federal funding for allowing this type of nonsense. Trump is saying in America no more. You will not get a single dime of federal funding if you are allowing this. And we also got to give you some updates on Columbia University and their issue with the funding. So we'll talk about all of that in today's video, folks. First, though, if you enjoy the content, do us a favor. Make sure you are subscribed. Okay, hit that red button down below. Subscribing is the best way to support our work, and it ensures, guys, that we can keep doing these videos. And with that said, okay, let's just frankly, first of all, remember that when it comes to the Department of Education, Trump here is doing what he said he was going to do. Promises made, promises kept.
And I will shut down the federal Department of Education, and we will move everything back to the states where it belongs and where they can individualize education and do it with the love for their children.
Now, some people might have thought that, hey, that's just something that Trump is, of course, saying to win the votes of Moms for Liberty or evangelicals or whatever it is. But no, guys, according to Fox News here as of tonight, Trump is set to officially sign the executive order that will abolish the Department of Education. Trump will need the approval of Congress to, of course, fully nix and abolish the agency. But as we've seen thus far with places like USAID, you don't necessarily really need to fully abolish to make major reforms that essentially make a useless, or in some cases counterproductive, agency basically non-existent or a shell of its former self. But we digress. We'll talk about that later. First, here are those details. President Donald Trump, guys, is moving forward with plans to abolish the Department of Education. Trump is set to sign an executive order following through on a campaign promise to disband the department, claiming on the campaign trail that the department was full of radicals, zealots, and Marxists. That is certainly true. And that's true outside of the DOE as well. It's a huge problem within our education system as a whole, but maybe that's a place that you start. I personally will say that, maybe one of the last things that the DOE does before it's on its way out is try to, I guess, reform that aspect of education, right? Try to actually fight back against the indoctrination, maybe use a department for good for once. But if that can't be accomplished, then I guess, shutting it down altogether. Who is really going to miss it? Who's even going to notice that it's gone, by the way? Because it's very funny. Despite all, I've seen the left-wing reactions. They're, of course, hysterical. They're saying, how could Trump shut down the Department of Education? Look, guys, do you see what he's doing? This is what Project 2025 warned you about. It's like, guys, can anyone make me one single argument in defense of the Department of Education that doesn't hinge on education is in the name, therefore it must be good? Because that's literally the only Democrat response. You're shutting down the Department of Education? Do you hear yourself? That's a Department of Education. Yeah, do you hear yourself? Okay, just because education in the name does not mean the department has anything to do with education, or that it remotely, of course, benefits education. Like if Trump set up something called the Institute of Patriotism, or let's just say, heck, because, you guys don't believe in patriotism. Okay, let's say Trump set up the Institute of Saving Sick Puppies, right? Because who is against sick puppies, right? Everyone wants to save the puppies. We all love puppies, I presume, right? So if Trump set that up and the agency did nothing to save sick puppies and it was all political MAGA stuff, would it be good faith for MAGA to look at the Democrats and say, hey, you're against saving and fostering puppies? How dare you, right? That's ridiculous. No, just because education is in the name doesn't mean that it's good. When you actually break down the functions and the jobs of the Department of Education, you'll find, first of all, very little of it actually has to do with education. When you look at the tangible results, it has failed. America went from the best school system in the world to one of the worst in the entire first world, number 2. And of course, number 3 here, guys. Oh, Trump is cutting funds for education. No, he's not. Because all of the salaries that you pay for Department of Education bureaucrats literally could easily be used, of course, guys, to go to actual education. Right? This has long been the conservative argument. Why not get rid of the department and all the money that it sucks up and send that money directly to states and to local school districts? And if you guys don't believe me, just take a look at these numbers right here, just so we can all understand what is going on here. So according to Wall Street Apes, great information here, the average salary at the Department of Education was roughly $144,000 per year, which is a lot of money, okay? It's especially, keep in mind, 144, so they're making 6 figures, but on top of that, this is also not measuring the fact they're working for the government. So they're getting very cushy pensions, right, for life. Their retirement is already paid for. Their health insurance is paid for. Their kids' health insurance is paid for, et cetera, et cetera. So 6 figures plus that is what we're paying, so that's not even really the full number. Again, it's a government job. In 2025, that number increased to $145,000 per year. There are an estimated 4,000 employees at the DOE who basically none of whom were actually benefiting education in any tangible way. But guys, just so we understand, that is over $602 million every single year just in salaries. That is $600 you can immediately send to the states and to the actual schools to be doing stuff instead of paying for payroll. Okay, this is the problem in life generally. When you have a middleman in something, they just take away money and water down the actual economic benefit of what you're trying to achieve, and this has long been the case. So, more of the information here. A White House fact sheet claims that the move will turn over education to families instead of bureaucracies. Trump and proponents of eliminating the department have long said that the agency has failed American students. Well, again, when you just take a look at the timeline, right? 1970s, when it was created, #1 education system by rankings in the world. Now way slipping off. I think number 26, I believe, is the current number or something like that. So it's objectively true, right? And even if you want to say, guys, that, oh, it's not entirely the fault of the Department of Education, which I tend to agree with, right? I don't think it's the only reason by far that our education system has slipped so badly. But you objectively, guys, cannot deny here that it hasn't helped, right? It has not been successful in its job considering that correlation. But nonetheless, the NAP assessment scores reveal a national crisis. Our children are falling behind, said Harrison Fields, the White House principal deputy press secretary. Over the past 4 years, Democrats have allowed millions of illegal minors into the country, straining school resources and diverting focus from American students. Objectively true fact, by the way. Coupled with the rise of anti-American CRT and DEI indoctrination, this is harming our most vulnerable, he added. President Trump's executive order to expand educational opportunities will, of course, empower states, parents, and communities to take control and improve outcomes for all students. And of course, we are currently getting the meltdown. Following reports that Trump planned to sign the executive order, the American Federation of Teachers, I assume that's a teachers union of some sort, go figure, issued a statement imploring Congress to oppose the executive order and to, quote, make clear to the president that the federal government, in the face of this order, will not abdicate its responsibility to all children, students, and working families who deserve a future full of promise and possibility, not diminished dreams. So that's a great slogan, okay? And we're once again coming down to this argument of like, oh, the DOE is good because it has education in the name. But I once again ask the question to this teachers union, who I likewise ask, what are you actually doing to further education? What is the DOE doing that is allowing or empowering students or whatever they're saying, right? Future full of promise and possibility. Yeah, I totally agree, which is why their education should be getting the money and not $600 million a year for salary. But of course, you're a teachers union. You do not have students' best interests in mind. But nonetheless, going on here in the argument, the Department of Education and the laws it is supposed to execute has one major purpose: to level the playing field and fill opportunity gaps to help every child in America succeed, the American Federation of Teachers president said in a March 5th statement. Which I again asked the question, okay, that's the purpose. What are they doing? How are they actually fulfilling that? It turns out they're not, right? They're giving out these grants. They're just a bunch of middlemen. They really do nothing. Has opportunity expanded in American education since its inception? Right? Is our school system getting better or is it getting worse? It's getting worse. That's the simple answer. We're spending more money on it. Okay, it's not an issue of funding. We always hear this, right? We don't spend enough money on schools. No, we spend more on education than like basically anyone. No, that's not the issue. The issue is the way our schools are being run. But anyway, you go on here to say trying to abolish it, which by the way, only Congress can do, sends a message that the president doesn't care about opportunity for all kids. Actually, again, he does, which is why he's trying to give more money to the schools, not to the bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. But anyways, nonetheless, okay, so you get this whole big, gigantic meltdown. Now, this person is technically right about something. Trump will need the approval of Congress to fully shut down the Department of Education. Of course, he can mass fire a lot of people and basically render the agency unusable. But yes, to formally get rid of it, you, of course, will need a vote by Congress, to which I say, hey, to the Republican Party, what are you doing, okay? In yesterday's video on USAID, we of course brought up the fact that why are the House and Senate Republicans not currently working at warp speed to codify all of DOGE and all of the Trump reforms in our federal government? It seems like that's exactly what they should be doing. And of course, we know the reason why. It's because these rhinos, many of whom are neoconservatives, many of whom who have special interest connections linked to some of these corrupt government agencies, right? They're not much different from the Democrats in this regard. They don't want to see that happen, right? USAID, for instance. As much as every right-winger who is a voter in this country really looked at it and said, wow, America should not be funding this. This should not be a thing. They should totally be getting rid of. It's massive fraud going on. Let me bring this up, okay? A lot of the nation building, of course, that USAID was doing around the world is supported by the George Bush wing of the GOP, okay? And I don't know the specifics on this, But it frankly wouldn't surprise me if, you know, what USAID does, right? They basically funnel money to a nonprofit, to an NGO group, and then the NGO group does whatever with it, basically squanders it. Well, in some ways, there's a revolving door, right, between USAID money and the politicians themselves, hence why they don't really want it to be abolished, because guess what? USAID, of course, cannot directly give money to a politician's campaign, but you know who can? An NGO, right? A nonprofit, a third-party, 501c4, whatever. So what is the revolving door there, right? You have politicians in Congress, perhaps in both parties, indirectly funded by USAID. It wouldn't surprise me, right? But here's the thing. Here's what makes it different, and why there really should be no excuses from the Republicans on this issue of you should immediately be abolishing the Department of Education, even if you're a rhino, is that maybe unlike USAID, unlike the America First doctrine, guys, the Department of Education and things like school choice have been major core building block issues for conservatives, for the GOP, for years. Okay, long before Trump. This is not an issue that Trump invented. Okay, my entire adult life, the Republican Party has been saying they want to abolish the Department of Education. You have even the evangelical, neocon, whatever you want to say, wing of the GOP, right? The old Republicans, even they wanted to do it. So no excuse. First act of Congress in the Doge Act, in codifying all of the Doge reforms into law, immediately should be, yes, we're going to abolish the Department of Education. Of course, I would not even keep your hopes up on that, because we have so many soft milquetoast Republicans. I really question whether they're even going to do it. But guys, that should be a gigantic no-brainer. But with that said, guys, it's not just the Department of Education that we have to talk about today, because there's also a major update when it comes to Donald Trump and the transgender sports ban that he recently signed into law, and that is specifically relevant when it comes to the University of Pennsylvania, which you may remember was infamous for this whole thing. Take a listen to that update for yourself.
President Trump has promised to protect female athletes. He has threatened to rip federal funding away from any university that defies his executive order banning biological males from infiltrating women's sports, and he is doing it. We are the first to report that President Trump has paused $175 million in federal funding from the University of Pennsylvania over its controversial policies. A senior administration official telling Fox Business that this is just a taste of what could be coming down the pipe for Penn, a proactive punishment from the president to pull back discretionary spending going to the school from DOD and HHS. The university is still at risk of losing all its federal funding as a result of the ongoing Title IX investigations looking into Penn for allowing transgender athlete and biological male Leah Thomas to compete on the women's swim team, use women's locker rooms, while exposing his male genitalia to his fellow female athletes.
Boom. So yeah, there you have it. Again, the University of Pennsylvania over its refusal to comply with the, hey, stop being insane executive order, right? The stop putting men's and women's sports order from President Trump. Apparently, they will temporarily, for now, until they comply, be losing $175 million in federal funding. They may be losing all of it over, like she said there, Title IX investigation, which I think is just such an interesting aspect of this entire debate, right? 'Cause you have the small minority, right, to the 20% in America, and the polls apparently say it's literally 20%, who will argue that, hey, University of Pennsylvania is a private school, Columbia is a private school, they shouldn't be allowed, they shouldn't be forced to, run their school the way the federal government says, to which I say, okay, maybe that's true, except do we really even have private universities in America, considering they're virtually all receiving federal taxpayer dollars? Right? You can say Harvard is private. You can say Columbia or UPenn are private, but they're literally not, basically, if they're receiving, again, federal money there. And yeah, they're in blatant violation of Title IX. Title IX, say what you will about it, but if we're going to have it, we should at least implement it and enforce it correctly. Transgender athletes playing in women's sports is an obvious violation of Title IX, and if the punishment for violating that, apparently, as I understand, is losing federal funding, the law should be enforced evenly, right? Nobody is against the law. Of course, the University of Pennsylvania is actually the second entity just this month that will be losing federal funding. We also had the same situation happen up in Maine after the Democrat governor in that state further and likewise refused to comply with federal law.
The NCAA has complied immediately, by the way. That's good. But I understand Maine. Is Maine here, the governor of Maine?
Yeah, I'm here.
Are you not going to comply with it?
I'm complying with the state and federal laws.
We are the federal law. Well, you better do it. You better do it because you're not going to get any federal funding at all if you don't. And by the way, your population, even though it's somewhat liberal, although I did very well there, your population doesn't want men playing in women's sports. So you better comply because otherwise you're not getting any federal funding.
See you in court.
Every state, good. I'll see you in court. I look forward to that. That should be a real easy one. And enjoy your life after governor, because I don't think you'll be in elected politics.
Yeah, so these state governments, these universities are effing around, and they are rapidly finding out. And here's the thing, okay? Despite the fact that they apparently have like this $1 billion endowment or whatever, in many cases, it would appear that these universities have a tough decision to make because as woke as they are, they don't want to lose their federal grants, to which I say they probably should anyway. If they're private schools, why are we funding them? I just don't understand, you know? You mean to tell me, oh, Harvard, oh, Columbia, oh, they're strapped for money like we need to be subsidizing them as the taxpayer? Do you really think they're going to get less woke overall just because they cave on one thing? Probably not. But nonetheless, okay, the leverage there is important because apparently when it comes to Columbia, which President Trump defunded earlier this month in response to the violent protests that you saw back in May 2024. And that was a decision that caused some controversy. People said, oh, they're just doing that because it's related to Israel, whatever. Well, my stance the whole time was, I think in any case, regardless of it's pertaining to Israel or transgender sports or TPUSA on campus or something, you should not be allowing violent protests on your campus, right? Violence and riots and all that stuff is counterintuitive to free speech. It's counterintuitive to academic freedom and debate. And there's just no reason why a university should be allowing that, much less in some cases, perhaps sponsoring that. So I don't just look at like the Gaza protests of 2024 and think those universities should get in trouble. I think all of it, right? All of the riots that we saw on campuses back in like 2019, 2018, when Ben Shapiro came to campus, Charlie Kirk came to campus, and the universities and the university police did very little to ensure the safety or stop the riots or actually make free speech safe on campus. I think all those schools should lose funding. It doesn't matter if the issue is Gaza or abortion or transgender or Trump or whatever, right? You should have guarantees and safeguards and protections for free speech on all college campuses across America. And when you have illegal occupations, when you have violent protests, when you have like the nonsense you saw in like the library and all that stuff, that's not free speech, right? That's breaking the law. That's disorderly conduct. That's violence. It should not be tolerated in any form. Well, guys, regardless of what you think of all that, apparently, Columbia University is now getting close, because they want the $400 million, right, to yielding to President Trump's demands in negotiations to restore $400 million in federal funding. And apparently all the Trump administration is saying here is you as the university have to not allow violent protests. Okay, you have to be a lot stricter in cracking down and making sure that doesn't happen. And apparently, guys, Columbia is looking at it and saying, gee, I don't know. Maybe we do need to cave. Maybe we do need to give in. And yeah, ultimately, we'll see what happens. But I'm going to take a wild guess. When push comes to shove and these universities realize they need the money, do you think they're going to sit around and try to stand still for William Thomas there? You know, the stuff you're seeing in the sports? Or do you think they're going to cave the knee? I don't know. We'll find out. With that said, guys, let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.